Hello and welcome to the deepest dive from MinnMax. This is the best, most thorough discussion about the thing on the internet. We all know what we're talking about. I'm here with Leo Vader.
Hello, thank you.
And I'm Ben Hansen, in case I forgot to mention that, and I really am Ben Hansen. Joined by JV Gwaltney.
Hi.
Blast from the past. Hello, JV.
Hello.
JV's a former coworker, now doing PR at...
Terra Bruno PR, so we're working with Private Division and Riot and some other places.
Perfect. But you are what I consider a smart person. You have a tattoo based on a book or an author, and so I thought, look at that.
Oh, I can't turn my arm the right way.
And what is that weird thing for audio listeners?
What is that? What is the tattoo from?
It's the post horn from Crying of Lot 49.
Oh. Okay, cool.
All right, so you know JV knows how to read. He's a smart guy. So this is the perfect deepest dive for him. We're also joined by Mike Mahardy.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Welcome, sir, from Polygon fame.
Yeah.
How's it going?
Sure. Good. Thanks for having me. This is the first time I've seen this movie or read this book, so it was fun.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I'd imagine where we're all roughly coming from is we've all seen the 1982 film, yes?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. But where's everybody else coming from with this? Like, everybody's going in cold. So I had read like half of the book, Who Goes There, and trailed off, which is a short book, so that's not a good sign. And then I'd seen the 1951 film. So I'm coming in maybe with the most background here. But Leo, where were you at for this thing?
Oh, stone cold. I'd only heard about these other adaptations, didn't know thing one about them. No pun intended.
There's going to be a lot of that. Perfect. Is everybody else in that same camp?
I had read halfway through the story back in college and bounced off of it similarly. But first time seeing the movie. First time reading the story all the way through.
Oh, awesome. So, if you haven't picked it up by now, what this is the best, most thorough discussion about The Thing. We're taking The Thing and breaking it up into multi-part chunks, cross-media event, we like to say. So we're starting out in this discussion talking about the original book from 1938, Who Goes There, by John W. Campbell. Then we're talking about the 1951 film, The Thing from Another World. Then next week, we're going to be talking about John Carpenter's The Thing from 1982. And then after that is where it gets freaky and strange, where we're going to be talking about the 2011 prequel film. We're going to be talking about the tabletop adaptation, the video game adaptation, and anything else that we can mop up that's The Thing related, so we can cover every version and every iteration of The Thing, because I consider The Thing to be my favorite horror film of all time. And so it's nice to go back and actually walk through the history of how this thing happened. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you. I'm so glad you found it. Thank you for being here. You can unlock the podcast version of this if you support MinnMax on Patreon at the $5 tier. We'd appreciate the support. Also, if you support us at any tier whatsoever, you can submit a comment. So if you're watching this and thinking, I have a very specific thought on the 1982 film, The Thing, that I want them to read on this show, we will do that. If you support us at any tier, then we'll have a post up on Monday looking for your comments. You can leave it there and we'll read it there. Mike Mahardy, is that everything? Did I hit the beats?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, perfect. That it seems to do it. So Leo, we like to play a little game on the deepest dives. Normally, we're covering video games like your Mario 64s, your Chrono Triggers, your Halos. But
classics.
No matter what the medium is, we like to play a little game called Most Common Comment. Trying to figure out what was the most common comment that was submitted by all of our wonderful Patreon supporters in regards to the book and the original film. What do you think is the most common comment?
Across both of these?
Yeah, let's just bundle it all together.
The fire scene in the movie.
Interesting. JV, do you have a guess?
These things have not aged well.
Okay, tip in your hand. And Mike Mahardy?
I've never experienced either of these, and I'm looking forward to it.
So someone who just preemptive, like, I'll get to it eventually. No, I think it was not overwhelming, but there's definitely a lot of people that are like, what the hell is this movie? When is The Thing gonna do the thing? But I think number one most common comment was people appreciating the scientific approach to the book. Like appreciating how in-depth those science discussions were, which is something that I was not expecting so many people to grab onto. But I think, a lot of fans of horror out there are so frustrated by people in horror fiction not doing the logical route. And so just having a book and having that ability to really expand on well, let's walk through this and let's work through some scientific reasoning for why we believe it might act this way. People appreciated that kind of depth. But let's see, JV's going to be negative. Leo?
I'm actually not that negative. I just assumed like that's what a lot of people thought. But,
interesting.
I do think certain elements haven't aged well, which is fine. But I think, viewed within the capsule of like, oh, this is a product of its time, they're both good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of pros and cons to walk through here with people. Maybe even before we get to anything, Smithers43 had an interesting question. He says, I've never seen the 1982 Thing film, but I've wanted to for a while, and I'm excited to watch it. Should I watch that first and then read the short story and original film? I want to go into the 1982 Thing in the best way possible. This is tough.
Yeah, I would say watch 82 first.
I think so too.
I feel like reading this or seeing 51 might give poor expectations, because going into the Thing, the first time I saw it, I would have been about like 20 years old or something. I didn't exactly know what to expect outside of like a few firsthand recommendations, and it blew me away. But I do feel like these might sully that first time experience.
I do feel like it's like getting like the Criterion Collection and then watching the special features before you watch the movie. Like you're watching like the background sort of historical data things before you actually experience like the centerpiece. And, sometimes that's a good thing, but I don't think so in this case. I would definitely lead with like the main show. And then if you like that enough, work your way backwards.
Yeah. This is where it gets complicated, Leo. Maybe you can guide me on this one, but it's like, I agree. I think the best way possible is to go completely cold into the 1982 film. At the same time, if you're watching this, the point of the deepest dive is to go through all of this stuff. And so despite that, we're not going to spoil the 1982 film in this discussion if we can avoid it. Obviously, the premise will naturally be discussed as we're talking about the book specifically, but details, surprises, big differences, let's try and save some surprises for next week when we actually talk about the 1982 film. Does that make sense, Leo?
Yeah, it'll be hard to divorce ourselves from the built-in bias of like us all having seen and loved the 82 film first. And certainly when I was watching and reading this, the whole time I was thinking like, oh, the movie did this better or worse at certain parts or whatever.
Yep. Yeah, but that was one of the fun. Yeah, it was one of the fun things about reading the book, though, is just having that love of the movie and just being able to be like, oh, these characters by and large have the same name. So just having like, basically, it feels. This is a dumb thing to say. It feels like fan fiction of the movie, but like being able to like take the actors and like remix them when I'm reading the book, like it feels perfect, right?
I will say I appreciate the movie more now, having seen these or read this and seen the 51 movie.
Yeah, I feel the same way because I did sort of the same thing because with Stalker, the movie and the game, like you go back and you read, I think it's called Roadside Picnic, is sort of like the basis for both the movie and the game, and it's so wildly different from what those things are. I got kind of the same vibe here of like, oh, this is where the path diverges. This is where, it stayed true to the book, or at least like the 1982 movie and the 1951. Like the things that they change, I think was the most interesting aspect for me of like, oh, this is, how creators change things when they get their hands on the keys to like whatever the story is.
It's funny too, because I got the edition with William F. Nolan's forward, who wrote Logan's Run, and they actually, I don't know if you guys have this version, but he included his treatment on the 82 screenplay before they passed on it to give it to John Carpenter. So I kind of saw another mini version of what that creator would have done with it.
That's awesome. Neat. Yeah, I just read on Wikipedia that so in his version for that 1978 film, let's see. So they reduced Campbell's original story down to a number of characters, replaced the single alien with a group of 3, and downplayed monster elements in favor of an imposter theme in a vein similar to the Body Snatchers. Which I like the idea of going from 1 alien to 3. Seems unnecessary. Like, I like the idea of, it goes back to the alien versus aliens debate, I guess. But I like the idea of just this one central force that's so terrifying that you can't possibly reckon with.
Or it quickly becomes, you don't know how many there are, as it takes people over in the book, which I think is more interesting.
Or it's growing more of itself.
Right.
This little flower bed of gonad-looking things.
Screaming like dying babies. All right, there's a lot to go through here. So this original book, just for a little backstory, this is John W. Campbell, written in 1938. John W. Campbell, this is, again, Wikipedia research, don't blame me. Isaac Asimov, famous writer, he called Campbell the most powerful force in science fiction ever. which seems bold. So this is a short story. It was included in an anthology. I was reading it in like a 13 short science fiction stories book collection thing that I bought a while ago. So it's from 1938, but then just last year, they published a larger version of it. And I'm curious if anybody watching or listening to this checked that one out. So that one's called Frozen Hell. And apparently what it is when John W. Campbell passed away, they were digging through his attic, just tearing apart all his stuff like a bunch of weirdos. And they found like this manuscript that was an expanded version on Who Goes There that had like an extra 47 pages. And so then they released that in 2019 as like an expanded version that's called Frozen Hell. And then of course it's like the book that inspired the thing on there, which certainly makes sense because reading this, it certainly feels like there's some weird gaps here. Like it seems like there's some backstory that's just missing a little bit.
No filler.
No filler.
Just the meat of the concept, which I appreciated about it.
Yeah.
The gaps I could see in the book more than, like, not to spoil anything, the book more than any other version of this story, the characters seem very okay with the idea of sacrificing themselves for the greater good of Earth.
Yes.
Like, right away. Like I think McCready or Commander Gary mentions it, and everybody's like, yeah, of course. But of course, in everything else, it's like there's a few outliers or who are, you know, being a little more selfish. From reading it, it felt like they were all very okay with it right away.
I think that's also like an aspect of that era of science fiction and literature in general, right? Because we're talking about the 30s and sort of like all the characters become these like ideological, like, you know, representations. Like the symbolism is right there, or like they're just larger than life. Like McCready in the book is just described as like this golden Greek god kind of character to the point that it's ridiculous. And like, you know, Kurt Russell looks good, right? But
no doubt about it.
You know, he's not Hercules, right?
Modest height. I'll describe him.
Every character in the book, like I think McCready is like, yes, bronze, and then it's like they're talking about Conant, and he is like made of steel and small. It's like everybody is this like immovable force going up against this like unknowable creature. And I don't know, it's like a lot of those compilations back in the day, which obviously, admittedly, I haven't read many of them, but even like some of Asimov's stuff is very much like that. Everybody's less a character and like these archetypes that just serve the greater purpose of the speculation of how like the creature or how the idea works.
Yeah, and I think like that tropes idea definitely comes through in a bigger, cleaner way even in the film. But I was so taken aback by that. I did not expect reading this book that the most recurring description is just about what a tall hunk of man McCready is. Like, oh my God, those bronze muscles just bulging every ounce of his being, sexier than the last.
There were several paragraphs.
And then it's like talking about characters living and dying, like the blood test. It's like, yeah, you get the idea. Kind of was the thing. Moving on. It's like, wait, what is this? Like, focus on who's dying and when more than what McCready's eyebrows look like. It's amazing.
Yeah. I think that's more. I do think that ends up being more of like a format thing because the story was published in a periodical. It wasn't. Yeah. It didn't come out of. Yeah. So I feel like that's where the thing they had to brush up against with like censors and stuff, because you're not going to have like a story in the 30s going into like just these awful details about, you know, and then we shot him in the head and we had to clean up all the blood and this and that. Like, that's not going to happen.
That's interesting. You know? Yeah, I guess I hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah, I guess that makes sense. Well, let's just zoom out a little bit. Mike, what do you think of the short story? Who Goes There?
I enjoyed it. It definitely had more of a scientific bent than anything else. It very much, I think more than anything, it got me into the mind of the Thing.
Yeah.
At least like from the point of view of like McCready, because of course like another not major difference, but like telepathy, its ability to read minds plays a pretty big part in the novella compared to some other versions. So going through like McCready's thought process, which could get pretty convoluted at points, like they really push the idea that these are a bunch of smart dudes living here.
Yes.
And especially when they're describing the tests, like I looked up the human immune rabbit tests.
I was so confused with that because they have 2 waves of blood tests, and the second one is the one that is it's so much cleaner to understand of, hey, every ounce of the thing is alive, so it will try and avoid a hot thing. So it'll jump out of this thing if it's being attacked. Whereas the other one's like, rabbit dog, and they need different dogs and different immunities to test against the thing. Do you understand what was going on there?
From what I gathered, it basically, if the blood reacts, it means that it recognizes itself in the vial, I think. So if it doesn't react, it means it's all foreign and it's poisoning it, etc. So in order for human blood or monster blood to react in the vial, that means one or the other is in the vial already, as I gathered it.
Okay.
But when Blair, no, not Blair, the biologist, it was Dr. Copper, I think, when he first kind of figured out that he or Commander Gary were definitely a thing.
Yes.
That I didn't fully understand. I like the horror of it and I like the surprise of it, but I didn't fully understand. Like, I know they figured out, they're like, oh, the dog has monster blood. But it did feel like there were a lot of gaps in the logic. I feel like John Campbell is just way smarter than me and doesn't stoop down to my level. So I enjoyed just going with the flow. But
yeah, like that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
The quick beat of, well, of course, all of the cows down here are infected and all of the dogs are infected was one of those like, wait, what is going on exactly? I've lost track exactly of what's going on in the animal world. But I guess the point is we can write everything else off and there's no more tests. That's all we really need to take away from that.
Yeah, and again, the book really got me thinking of like the logic of it. It's like, okay, if they're going to sleep in shifts and half of them are going to be awake and half of them are going to be sleeping, if I'm the monster, when would I strike? Do I have to wait until they switch up the groups so there's like one or two people and then I strike? So then when they wake up, we can start whittling them down.
Right.
And again, I think most of these like speculations were through the mind of like McCready or Blair or someone. But I do think that these characters were, I think it was a bit above my skill level and understanding a lot of this logic. But again, more than anything, it's also like, it surprised me how much it captured the horror of like knowing something for certain, but still having that 1% chance that you are a thing, even though you know you're human. It's like when they, like, I think Connett breaks down when he breaks down crying when he first like finally is like, okay, see, I'm not a thing, before they realized the test was flawed. And again, that's kind of like with other characters, the same thing. They knew they weren't a thing. They knew they were human, or they thought they did. But then when the test showed that they were human, they still had this like wave of relief. It's like there's still certain things they don't understand about the monster. Like, maybe I am one. And I think the book captured that like self-doubt a little more than I was expecting. And I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
It was like its own form of horror that I didn't get from the other version of this story.
Yeah, the self-doubt was constant. I loved like when they did the test with the milk after they killed the cows and they tested the milk that was milked beforehand to see if it was, from monster cows. They were like, well, it checks out. So either they weren't monsters or the monster can just make perfect milk. So we kind of don't know anything.
Yeah, it honestly reminded me, have any of you guys seen the 2005 Battlestar?
Just a couple of them.
Yeah, like it reminded me more of than like the later Thing movies of like Cylons and that, where it's like Cylons are basically in that story, they're like androids or aliens that can look like humans, or robots that can look like humans, basically like Terminators, but they can blend in and stuff. And they don't know. A lot of them don't know. They're like sleeper agents. They don't know that they're Cylons. So it makes me think of that sort of thing of like, oh, am I the thing? That real self-doubt sort of thing that Mike and Leo were talking about. It makes me think more about that than sort of like, because the paranoia in the other versions of the thing aren't really like inflicted on the self. It feels like it's more about the other people in the room. It's like, oh, are they going to turn on me? Are they the thing? Rather than like, am I the thing? Like, that doesn't really come up that much, I think, in other versions of the story.
Right. I mean, without being a spoiler, like there is like a test scene in the 1982 film where there's, I think, a character actually sighs relief when they're tested and it's proven that they're not the thing. So there's still like subtle nods to that.
Very tiny.
Right. But I think the amazing thing about this book, is it adds more to the rule set of what the thing is, what it can do, and it also just makes everything murkier. But so Stephen Mintz wrote in, he's with you, he submitted a comment on Patreon saying, in chapter 9 of Who Goes There, Copper and Gary both insist they know they're human but can't prove it, which sends Copper into a breakdown and compels Gary to transfer command to McCready because he fears he's been compromised. More than any other versions, Novella seems to suggest that humans may not even know they're possessed, which is even more frightening than an alien acting the part of a human. And then Darkfish Days follows it up and says, yeah, in the novella, I kind of like that Kinner, the cook, asks, would I know if I was a monster? Would I know if the monster had already gotten me? Suspecting others is disturbing enough, but to me, there's something even more unsettling about not knowing if I can trust myself. Absolutely.
Yeah, there's Leo mentioned like the milk thing, and that kind of encapsulated it, because the other stories are very much like, okay, the monster can clearly like mimic, or I mean, not in the 1951 movie, but the other versions, like the monster can really like mimic people, but to what extent? The book really goes into like, if it's actually mimicking human cells, would that include our thought patterns and like how we, of course, maybe it has to learn someone's slang, but if they're really becoming someone, wouldn't they just actually assume their thoughts and be that person? So the horror of that becomes like, maybe I already am this thing, right? But what actually defined me to begin with if it's this easy to become me? Or like, did I have a self anyway? Or have I ever had a self? And you're so isolated in this group that it's like, who am I anymore? It doesn't matter.
Am I so cheaply manufactured? Like, what is my life worth? You know, sort of thing. Like, it's really like a kind of philosophical horror almost.
Yeah. That's what I love about the book, is it like, for only being however many pages, it really encapsulates everything that is scary about the concept. Like, it really understands and goes through like all of these different thoughts you would have in this situation.
Yeah, to me, it's still mostly like I appreciate the book ultimately as being like the material that you cut out better versions of this story from, you know, but some of the things that got left on the floor, like the self-doubting thing, it is kind of sad, you know, that's not in the other two versions.
Yeah, there's something fun though in the movie versions about looking for a tell. And I think something that reading this book kind of left me with was that like, there's not going to be any tell. You might be the thing yourself and you have no idea. So the idea that there's a puzzle to solve here is almost out the window with the book. It's just, you are effed here. There is nothing you can do.
And it's interesting to think about like Among Us in this context.
Yeah.
You know, because you're never unsure if you're the thing or not, right? Like, you know, and you'd like have to blend in or try. Like, I would like a version, I'd like to see like that mechanic sort of put into Among Us, if that could happen, of like sort of like a roulette thing of like, well, I don't know, I could be, but I don't know how you would gamify that within that design, but I'd love to see it.
Well, Clark in the book kind of did that when he killed, who'd they isolate when he was singing hymns and everything.
Yeah.
He kind of did that. He went to kill, I forget his name. Kinner, thank you.
Yeah.
He went to kill Kinner, like not being completely sure, but also he was just being driven crazy by these like Bible, like church hymns he's singing in the other room. And then of course, like he accidentally does the group a favor by exposing Kinner as the thing. But the thing was so well attuned to Kinner that it also knew how he would like break down in that situation and revert back to these songs in order to, you know, stay sane or just embrace the insanity. So that's when it truly is like, I almost at that point just gave up on the logic and just went with it and was like, okay, let's see how this plays out. Because for the first like 60 pages, the first half or so, I was like, okay, I follow this. I get how that test works. I'm a bit murky on why that led him to believe this. But after a while, I was like, okay, I feel like I'll enjoy it more if I just like go with it.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm very curious. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Leo.
While we're on that moment with Kinner, that was one of my favorite parts of the book, is when Clark kills Kinner and they find out, and McCready is like, well, before we know Kinner is the thing and he's just a corpse, McCready is like, well, now we know Clark is the only person we can trust.
Yeah, here's the quote,
because
Leo.
The thing would not kill someone like that. So this murderer is the only one who's for sure human among us.
Yeah, McCready says, boys, meet Clark, the only one we know is human. Meet Clark, the one who proves he's human by trying to commit murder and failing. Will the rest of you please refrain from trying to prove you're human for a while?
That's one thing throughout the book, and like I kept kind of forgetting like what time and place it was made, because all of a sudden this like 1938 slang would appear and it's like, oh gee golly, it's shit like that. I was like, oh right, this is an old book. Or like some of the things they would say when they're talking about, especially even McCready, this bronze god of man.
Oh
like,
God, so hunky.
Some of his stuff would be like, man, he's not going to be too popular if we go off with one of them pals and then don't come back with, I don't know. And it was just funny how that brought me back down after these horrible scenes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like they use the word queer constantly. It's like, okay, that's right. They're describing weird things. And it's got me thinking about the word queer and like, what a journey that word has had since the 30s or 20s. And now it's been judo flipped back into a positive thing. It's quite the journey. Yeah, there's that one passage where I'm totally with you, where I'd be reading it and moving along and then just all of a sudden it'd be like, oh, this has just aged in the weirdest way. So Conant, talking about the expression on the thing, he says, "Peaceful resignation. If that is the best it could do in the way of resignation, I should exceedingly dislike seeing it when it was looking mad." Which just sounds like Conan doing an impersonation of somebody from the 30s. It's like, what is this writing all of a sudden?
Speaking of Conant, one area where I went way too deep, the name struck me as familiar, and like a lot of my family's extended family's last names are like traditional Irish Gaelic that have been morphed into Americanisms. Conant, if you go back far enough, is a family name that literally translated means rabbit. I don't know if that was on purpose from Campbell. I'm sure it wasn't. Of course, like I said, I went way too deep and down a rabbit hole, and then discovered that. Anyway,
yeah,
that was my little weird.
You're connecting it to like the rabbit immune test. Is that the idea?
Yeah, because he was the one that was kind of the focus of that at first, or he was the one that you're thinking about the whole time. Again, it's probably an accident.
Can we talk about the cook a little bit more, singing those hymns? Because I love that idea of them going from like, well, God has forsaken us down here. Clearly, God can't reach Antarctica because the cook is screaming these hymns and we're all still going to die in here. And then the realization that he was the thing. And then they're like, oh, he was praying to a God that he hates because we know that aliens hate God. But then it gets so weird then with Clark murdering him, stabbing him in the neck in the kitchen with a knife. And it's like, okay, so that's an interesting idea that he was proving he's human by doing something inhumane. But then later on it's revealed that Clark is also the thing. So what do you think happened there? Do you think he killed him and then, or stabbed him and then absorbed him after that? Or was it the thing on thing action?
Well, that brings up the question. It's like, would the thing be smart enough to kill one of its own to earn people's trust? Kind of like you screw up one of the quest parties in Avalon, but then it's also like, or did he become Clark so much that it actually was driving him crazy?
Yeah.
Or maybe he did hate God so much, Earth's God or whatever you want to say, that he killed this guy praising him. It's like, no, I'm the fucking God here. Like, don't do this. That definitely brought up a lot of questions, because when I found out Clark was a thing, I was like, okay, I clearly have no idea what's going on anymore at all.
Well, there is a passage I took down that kind of talks about that when they're asking why Conant would wake everyone up if he was the thing instead of giving the original thing like more of a chance to escape.
Right, yeah.
Escape. Dr. Copper says, "The thing is selfish. You didn't think it looked as though it were possessed of a store of the higher justices, did you? Every part of it is all of it. Every part of it is all for itself, I imagine." So it might each part of it might not be interested in working together with the other part at all.
Yeah. That's
and then would each part even recognize another part? Like, I think they imply it would, and it does because it's like, but they do say that like the cells that have absorbed and coated themselves, it's like it is made up of like these super nuclei that then surround themselves with the nuclei of the dog or the rabbit or the human. And if you were just to look at it, you'd be like, of course, that's a dog cell. That's something that's consistent across, a couple of the other movies. But then I was wondering, would it even recognize another version of itself? And I think that's where the telepathy kind of leads me to believe maybe it would because of that. Like, it wouldn't think the same. But of course, again, loops back on itself. It's like, but if it really did become this person, maybe it would just think it's reading the mind of a human.
Right.
And then it's just this like...
Oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say, it's like the terror of that confusion just continually, this infinite, like, questioning yourself and questioning the people around you.
Yeah, and plus there's an underlying thing, to get back to Leah's passage, of like, just like how much do the humans actually understand the thing? It's like, okay, they have all these ideas about it. Are they accurate? Like, is every single like hypothesis they have about the thing accurate?
Right.
Because it is. They jump to so many grand conclusions, and it seemed insane for them to know so much about the thing until they start talking a little bit more about that telepathy and the fact that like on their journey back to bring this alien corpse that they found in the Antarctic, just to give the plot of the book, by the way, back to the base, on their journey to bring it back, that idea that they all had terrible nightmares, that it could assume the form of other things. So clearly it was conveying something telepathically. So these hints and ideas about what it's capable of and where it came from and stuff, it maybe is coming from the informed position of the thing itself through telepathy.
Right, and then it's like, why would he be projecting those thoughts? Why would he want people to have visions of his power or its power? Like, then it then it becomes like maybe it knew what it was doing all along, and then we can talk about the ending more later, but
yes,
maybe see the ending differently.
But I like this detail too when they're talking about trying to figure out more tests to figure out if Connacht is the thing, and they propose giving him a test, and they're like, if the alien's so smart because it's some higher being, then he would perform better on the test than Connacht would. So that would prove that he is the alien. It's like, of all the ideas for tests, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Give him a multiple choice test, then kill him if he does too well. But then their idea is, oh, you can't do that because the alien would know you're trying to trick it because it has telepathy and it can read your mind and implant stuff into your mind. You just can't win against this thing.
And
yeah, I just want to jump back because I think it was Mike that brought up sort of the experience of like trying to follow for 60 pages the logic and then getting lost in it. I think that's my favorite sort of aspect of the story. Is I'm not sure if it's like on purpose or not, but I still think it like ties to the work in a good way. Is like you're experiencing like these people who are, you know, scientists and whatnot, or like, you know, fairly intelligent people getting lost.
Yeah.
You know, you're sort of going along that experience yourself of just like slowly becoming overwhelmed to the point that like knowing the particulars of each test and the reasoning, like it just becomes a labyrinth that, you know, you're in, and eventually you get to the point where you're just wandering without, you know, necessarily any hope of understanding everything, unless you're a super genius maybe. But I really like that aspect of the book.
Yeah, I like that they all have so much faith in MacReady. There's not too much doubt about what's going on with MacReady. And I'm shocked just for this short story, it seems like the type of story that is tailor-made for first person. And I'm surprised that he went third person with this, right? Because it seems like just if you are fully locked in on MacReady's point of view, wouldn't that be a more tense experience instead of jumping around to everybody?
I feel like thematically it makes sense to have this kind of third person semi-omniscient, because you really do want to get in the heads of everybody involved. And I guess that kind of, again, like makes sense for the monster involved, that it would be doing that. Especially considering the telepathy angle.
Yeah, I think I think third person affords it the necessary detachment that the story needs, because if it was first person, I'm afraid what would happen is you get this sort of telltale heart vibe going on, like an Edgar Allan Poe of like just overflowing metaphors and every sentence being about how anxious you are and this and that, because that typically is what happens with first person horror stories, especially older ones.
My beard looks so good from this angle. My bronze body looking down is stunning.
Yeah.
Flex again.
But I do think that like third person is a good like perch to see all these hapless fools sort of running around like, you know, fighting the inevitable sort of thing, or like trying to fight something that's just so overwhelming. I do think that that's more of a natural place to view the action.
Yeah.
Plus there was that scene where Connacht first got taken before they even established the rules of the thing, which only works in third person, where it's like, I have the passage here if you want me to read it.
Do it in your best spooky voice.
Okay, this is the whole scene when he's watching over the thing. Connacht felt an unreasoning desire to pour the contents of the lamp's reservoir over the thing in its box and drop the cigarette into it. The three red eyes glared up at him sightlessly, the ruby eyeballs reflecting murky, smoky rays of light. He realized vaguely that he had been looking at them for a very long time. Even vaguely understood that they were no longer sightless. But it did not seem of importance, of no more importance than the labored slow motion of the tentacular things that sprouted from the base of the scrawny, slowly pulsing neck. Connacht picked up the pressure lamp and returned to his chair. It feels like he got taken in that moment, but it's like the narrator itself skipped over it.
That's interesting.
Like shortly after they do that, they end the chapter with him like with his back to it, right? And then it's like he heard a creak in the floorboards but thought nothing of it. The creak got closer, and then the chapter ends. I thought that was the moment where it was like coming up on him.
You know, I thought that of like he was already taken by it, so he wasn't intimidated by it.
Ooh, that's good too. That's good too.
Yeah. That sounds like he's getting taken in that moment.
I love their debate, their very scientific debate about, do we thaw this thing? I don't know. I mean, low-end life forms can be brought back to life after they're thawed. High-end life forms can't. What defines low-end versus high-end? Is this thing dead? Of course it's dead. Meanwhile, multiple times they describe its hair is wiggling and moving in the ice. It's like, what are you doing, you idiots? Just look at it. Of course it's alive.
It definitely, it's almost, I'm not sure if it's intentional or unintentional. It's almost humorous, right? Of like these sort of like puffy academics having this conversation while the real thing is right there in front of them, and the answer is right there in front of them, but they're still debating over it.
Yeah.
You know, there's something very amusing about that.
Yeah.
Even in a horror story.
Jeff Enright submits a comment on Patreon saying, so I read the short story and criticism aside, I loved it. I never knew how the thing looked. So if you'll permit me, here's the description of the short story. Okay, before I do this, I need help on this word. Tarpaulin? Is that the extended version of tarp? How do you pronounce that?
Tarpaulin.
I'm just going to say tarp.
Tarpaulin, yeah.
Okay, anyways, Jeff writes, a single throw of the tarp revealed the thing. The ice had melted somewhat in the heat of the room, and it was clear and blue as thick, good glass. It shone wet and sleek under the harsh light of the unshielded globe above. The broken half of the bronze ice axe was still buried in the queer skull. 3 mad, hate-filled eyes blazed up with a living fire, bright as fresh-spilled blood. From a face ringed with writhing, loathsome nest of worms, blue, mobile worms that crawled where hair should go. It's beautiful. And Mark Ramirez submitted a comment too saying, the most Thing content I've ever engaged with is Game Informer's replay of The Thing. So looking forward to this deepest dive. Also, I love seeing science fiction and people's thoughts of extraterrestrial things in a pre-World War II era.
That's interesting.
It is a good point, right? Like, it's so far away from just the grays. It's some weird 3-eyed, blue-haired, like Medusa creature.
When did The Day the Earth Stood Still come out?
1951.
Okay, so that's post World War II, yes.
Yeah, same year as The Thing.
Same years, same things.
Well, it's funny because the version of the monster that I came upon when I was just Googling it the other day, whenever you get the chance, look up the 1948 hardcover edition cover, and it's a very funny looking interpretation of what it would look like. It is like a Greek monster with long, wormy hair and 3 huge, like basketball size eyes. Not at all what I was expecting. I was expecting more like the twisted, grotesque, like, I didn't think the 3 eyes were like perfect. I thought one was down here, one was up here. I was imagining more what the movies kind of conditioned me to think about.
Mike, it's sort of like a Futurama character.
Yeah, exactly.
Alien.
Yeah.
Yeah. My Shiba dog's being a little naughty. I'm going to go fix that. I'll be right back.
A little suspicious, but sure. Just going to take care of the dog that's acting differently. I was surprised too, like in the final battle, which, we can go into a little bit later, but they're describing a lot of like the tongue of this thing. Like apparently its tongue is a big deal, and it's using its tongue and jumping around onto the ceiling and
3
stuff.
feet.
Yeah.
And it's burning, forget who gets grabbed by it, but that it sounds more like Alien at that point. Like it's acidic in some way.
Right. Yeah, this thing is all over the place. But let's go through some of the comments here. Barrett Boswell points out, he says, hello, imitations. Good job. Pass the test. I just watched the 1951 movie and read the 1938 novella for the first time and loved it. I highly recommend reading the novella while listening to the Thing's soundtrack, John Carpenter's.
That's what I did.
Really? That's totally the smart move. Alan Liebold wrote in saying, I've read Who Goes There Before, so quickly to revisit it for the deepest dive, I listened to an audio drama, which was a very well-made production, complete with ambient wind sounds, dogs barking and yelping, and a full voice cast, including a Scottish accented Macready. It's so dialogue and exposition heavy that I think the radio playstyle format worked nicely. My main takeaway from this story is that the premise is so good, all the pieces are in place for it to eventually become one of the greatest horror movies ever made. But we're not talking about that one yet. Yeah, well, I guess that's fair. Speaking
of wind sounds and everything, I'm actually, all this inspired me to go back and watch season 1 of The Terror, based on Dan Simmons' book from 2007. Just the idea of like the harsh Arctic or Antarctic landscape. There are a few sections in the novella that really drove home how fucking terrifying just going outside for 5 seconds is in this weather, and how confined they really are. Like even, I think it might have been Kinner. He was the one who back, like they said a few weeks before this, or a few months, he ran outside briefly to like chase maybe one of the cattle or something like that. And he got lost for a while. And it's just really like that is kind of like an added layer of the horror that they go back to a few times, especially toward the end when they're going to the East Cache to get Blair. But I like that as well.
I mean, there's definitely... Sorry.
I appreciated that about the book, is that that was like hot off a sequence of like, here's all these numbers about the wind speeds and describing what a cold temperature is. And then it'll give you like an anecdote about, this guy ran out and was instantly like blinded by the snow.
Yeah, there's definitely something otherworldly about that setting, right? Like in the Terra and the Thing. Anytime you're like in an Antarctic setting where it's like all like glacier sort of formations and stuff, and it's just endless, ice for miles and miles and miles. It's definitely like you're on another planet. I feel like it's a very good setting, just in general.
Yeah. Hayden Hodge submitted a comment saying, for me, the environment of who goes there is what elevates the atmosphere from scary to scarier with a touch of cozy. The Antarctic and Big Magnet Base Camp aren't just isolated, but snowy, windy, and dangerously cold. I can feel the scenes where the entire crew is huddled up in one room, running those tests. Yeah, it's an incredible setting. And it's interesting that, like the 1982 film, this is set in Antarctica. We'll talk about it later, but the 1951 film takes place in the Arctic, just to flip it on its head here. But I think the Antarctic is so much cooler for making it more remote. And a couple of friends of mine, they're brother and sister, so they went down together, although I forget if they're down there at the same time, but they actually worked from a base in Antarctica for years and years and years. And it's my favorite detail that, if you're on the summer shift, it's intense. But the extreme thing for the crew down in Antarctica is if you stay the winter, it's messed up. It's no joke. It'll really rock your brain, and you might leave a little bit different. And so apparently what they would do is every fall then, when the last helicopter was leaving that base and people were staying there for the winter, whoever was staying behind, they would watch The Thing every single year. But
man,
it's so cool. But the part that drives me insane is that my friend that was down there for so long, she never stayed the winter, and so she's never seen The Thing. She's like, well, I only would want to watch it in Antarctica, but I've never stayed the winter for the full year, so I still haven't seen it. It's like, oh my God, you've worked for years out of Antarctica and you haven't seen The Thing? It's impossible.
You mean the creature?
Yeah, how have you never seen
encountered
it?
the creature?
A little suspicious, actually. Yeah, now that I think about it.
Speaking of just thinking about Antarctica, it was funny that Carpenter's movie opened right away with the idea of The Thing, trying to escape or using the wildlife.
Sure.
And the book does not get into it until the end when they're like, holy shit, there's an albatross, kill it, because that's its way to Patagonia or wherever it decides to fly.
Right. And I love the book even goes into that more detail too of The Thing is naturally going right for those dogs because they're so much better at surviving this environment, or it's your best chance at surviving the environment compared to humans, which I guess is kind of implied in the later versions lightly, but I never directly connected it. I don't think that it's just being logical about this. Yeah, somebody wrote in about that darn bird. McManga says, after reading it, I have to say it's a true blue sci-fi classic. I really enjoyed it. Also, was that albatross a bird or an alien at the end? I mean,
say it's not an alien, but these characters could very well be.
Yeah, they're not terribly bright.
Well, someone in the last paragraph says, I'll pull it up. Oh, right. So McCready himself, after they kind of said, who was it? Norris says, we had him stopped. Another half hour. It was just tightening these straps on this anti-gravity bouncing device.
We'll get to that.
So I could wear it, and we'd have stayed in Antarctica and shot down any moving thing that came from the rest of the world. And then McCready briefly says, the albatross, do you suppose? And then he gets cut off by Norris. Would this thing almost finish with that death weapon it held in its hand? And then they decide that no, it would not have even bothered with the albatross because it had this jetpack thing. But the question, it didn't sound to me like the albatross, apparently they just kind of take it for granted that it did die, but it sounded to me like he just scared it away because he says it's not going to come back, but it dips behind a hill and then they assume it's dead. So I was thinking, is it supposed to be open-ended? Maybe it did escape, but it sounds very definite like the 51 movie.
Well, I don't know. I like to read it as the albatross was absolutely the thing, and they think they're on top of this, but they're not. But I think it's clearly meant to be ambiguous, but that logic doesn't exactly work out. Why not, if you see a bird and you're the thing, I'll just go ahead and become that bird real quick?
Yeah, and it feels like stories from that era typically aren't ambiguous, especially genre stories. It feels like because audiences wanted a definitive ending and they would complain or whatever, so feel like it's not open-ended. It's straight up the thing is the bird, or the bird is the thing, whatever.
Yeah.
They didn't know ambiguity back then.
Yeah, they don't know what that is.
That's
what is
right.
It's a 51 movie. And
no one knew what ambiguity was until The Sopranos. news.
That's true, actually. Yeah. I'm glad. Yes, breaking news.
And then everyone got mad.
Dylan Drazik writes in, says, already cohorts, or possibly not. Let's really soak in every time somebody makes that joke. I like how at the beginning of the novella, it's focused on the specifics of how a human sounded in the Antarctic environment, almost preparing you for the paranoia for the rest of the story. I love that too, that the opening is also just talking about how bad this place smells. And it's one of those things that just makes you appreciate the medium of like, oh, that's right. They couldn't open a film by talking about this place reeks, but they can really soak you in that environment in the book. And I think that goes to show in the 1951 film, the film opens with, holy crap, it's cold. Boy, is it cold. It's just that for like the first 5 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, the smell was really well. It was like a combination of machine oil. I think they say like blubber, the dog stench, and then like just sweat in general, but also like the damp linens and like that musty kind of thing. I was like, man, that was great.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of the few things that you can't like sort of replicate in other mediums is smell. Right? Like nobody can do it as well as you can in like literature or like, did you guys, the novelty gifts, the smell-o-vision or whatever? Like outside of that, like you can't really replicate that, movies or games or anything. So
it's funny,
that was
Steve,
a good way to read that.
Yeah.
Resident Evil 7 had this marketing. Did you guys get that candle? They called it the Resident Evil 7 4D candle. And you're supposed to light it while you play. And it reminded me, actually, you guys would all appreciate this. Like, I know, Ben, you've been to it, but did anybody else go to the Soap Factory haunted house in Minnesota or Minneapolis?
Never heard of it.
Apparently it was an old soap factory that they refurbished into a haunted house, but in certain rooms they used the same kind of like smell dispersal machines that a theater production company would use. And it really reminded me of that, like, it's like that sweat, blood kind of, because you're supposed to be in this like gulag where they're separating you into like different kinds of meat at that point. But it reminded me of that. I was like, yeah, it's funny seeing people try to use smell, but of course, like nothing's going to really land like the first 2 pages of this 120-page thing.
Yeah. Speaking of, you mentioned Resident Evil, so I'll go along with it. Tim Turry, friend of the show, wrote in, said, longtime listener, first-time writer, and let the record show he left this comment on the suggestion of comments and questions for Crossfade, our music podcast, but I found it, Tim, don't worry. And he says, thanks for the excuse to finally read this. What immediately jumped out to me is how much this book delves into the pseudoscience of the Thing creature. I can't follow all of it, but it reminds me of something that I love about the Resident Evil game and the lengths they go through to try and explain these insane viruses. Yes, Tim, everything's Resident Evil. Sorry, I'll stop being condescending. Thanks for writing in, Tim. That's very sweet.
No, it does. It's like almost... I would say like Resident Evil is kind of peaks and valleys of whether they're just jumping through hoops trying to justify their logic or whether they're just pulling it off really well. Like Resident Evil 7, I would say actually arguably does it better than any of the other games. But in the book, I feel like it actually kind of had this confidence in the logic of it, which again unraveled toward the end, which JV, you mentioned, it's like, there is that question of whether they really actually know what's going on here. Because then they find out later, they're like, well, we just found out that it can squeeze under door cracks and then reform on the other side. So it's like, wait, what is this thing that they're about to finish off, quote unquote, that they don't understand? Like, that's why I totally agree. I don't think a story at this time would have like been super ambiguous, especially this subtly. But I did, and maybe the movie conditioned me, or like just like the stories in general just conditioned me to like second guess myself. That's why I took the albatross as being the thing.
It's the albatross on the room, yeah. That is another tiny detail that I think is really important. That idea of, chains aren't going to work. By the way, I love the detail too where they talk about like, there's no locks in Antarctica. Like there's privacy doesn't exist down there. Why would you ever need it? So no doors have locks. But then that idea of like, you couldn't chain this thing up if you wanted to, because it can just turn back into blood and seep under a door, which has like, is that applicable in the other versions of the thing? Like probably, and it can expand the rules of what this thing can and can't do and certain logic problems that might result later on.
Well, yeah, it's funny because one of the questions that comes up when you're Googling it, like one of the first questions is like, what was the original form of the thing? And then like the most popular answer was like, I mean, probably just like a collection or like a puddle of independent cells that are just able to, again, use other nuclei to mimic the surrounding, protoplasm or whatever.
It's just Ditto from Pokemon. but angry.
The most dangerous game, yeah. Joshua Duperoy writes in and says, while the novella was a bit dry and bare bones at times for my taste, I felt the strong premise and interesting characters were more than enough to make up for all the technical mumbo-jumbo and drawn-out exposition. In fact, my favorite character had to be Blair, despite the fact that he's completely unlikable from the get-go. But in a way, I genuinely enjoyed hating him and the brand of caustic sarcasm he displays when dismissing the concerns of his fellow crewmates. For example, the passage where he's arguing with Norris about the possibility of catching some sort of disease from the carcass, and Norris confides in him about the troublesome dream he's been experiencing, to which Blair responds, so far, the only thing you have said this thing gave off was dreams. I had some too, so it's dream infectious. No doubt an exceedingly dangerous malady. God, what a dick. Also, the whole concept of the thing being able to project its primal thoughts into others in the form of dreams by means of telepathic powers is a really interesting idea that I never considered or was aware of even happening in later versions of the thing.
Yeah.
I like different, I guess we can talk about this later. Blair in particular, that version of Blair is very different from the movie version. I'm really looking forward to talking about that later.
But I do like that he's still like, I'm eating my own food. I'm only eating cans. I'm very, very trying to get logical about how I'm being trapped in this little room off to myself. When do you think Blair became the thing in the book? Do you think the entire time he was freaking out at the beginning, he was the thing, or was something as he was being transferred out to his little holding cell?
I feel like just with all the implications, I think he was him at first, or at least he was pretty positive he was. But at some point, like they mention afterward, they're like, man, the cattle, the wolves, I feel like something, especially when you find out it can just squeeze under cracks and like go over, I feel like something could have just gotten to him throughout. Like, I think this takes place, correct me if I'm wrong, over like several weeks.
It's right? A while, yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Because like the blood test itself took, I think, 8 days to the dog, they had to human immunize the dog. And I think that alone took 8 days, if I'm not mistaken. So this took place over a while. Like at some point, something could have gotten to him.
Yeah, right. I feel like that question is interesting only in the idea that like the answer is like it doesn't matter because it's so overwhelming, right? It doesn't really matter like the specific point. It's just there really is no escape. And I think different versions of the story sort of like capitalize on that better, but that's still here, right? Up until the end. Like there's still like that idea of like there's just no way out. This thing's gonna get us at every turn. That real strong sense of paranoia.
Yeah, Eric Angel submitted a comment on Patreon saying the short story was enjoyable, but it's a good thing it was short because it really lives on the premise alone. I couldn't tell you any of the names of the characters, and I just read it yesterday. It does dampen the effect of paranoia about who or who isn't a monster when I don't even know anything about the characters. Like at one point, 2 or 3 of the characters are found out to be compromised in quick succession, and I didn't feel anything. Just like, okay, let's move on. I enjoyed it, but if you told me that it was some groundbreaking sci-fi story, I would have been skeptical. But I guess the premise is just that strong that it's carried through.
I can see that in the sense that the characters are very much, aside from being defined as these like statuesque, many of them statuesque men, it's like a lot of them are just, Campbell defines them by their job. It's like airplane repairman or mechanic or cook or biologist, physicist, etc.
And McCready is a meteorologist, which I don't remember if he is in the other versions.
I think he's just the pilot.
No, he's the helicopter pilot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. I guess that's an easy shorthand there.
I feel like that criticism is fair, but it's also like a typical thing of a story, like sci-fi genre fiction of its time. Like outside of Hansen here, I don't think anyone could like name the characters on The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, right? Like, just point. Like sort of like Twilight Zone stuff, like The Foundation. I don't think anyone remembers the main characters' names from like that book. And that's like a huge sort of like foundational, sci-fi thing. I just don't think that like characters are necessarily memorable until later on. Like it's like the concepts at this era of sci-fi are more important than characters.
Yeah.
There was the concepts and ideas that actually defined these stories as sci-fi to begin with in these like periodicals and these collections. So I guess it would, again, like as this story evolved through the years, it kind of took on more characters, just like sci-fi in general, especially in movies did. But yeah, I mean, I just happen to remember them just, I think that's how I tend to take stock of the story as I'm reading. I think of like what each character is doing, what they're thinking, or again, until I got to a certain point where it was almost cathartic in the way I just kind of let go of trying to make sense of it all.
Yeah, but it helps with this one when so many of the names carry over from the 1982 film, where it's like, okay, a lot of these are one-to-one here. Bryan with the Y says, hey, fellow things in disguise.
That's pretty good.
Oh, JB likes it. Can we talk about the Blair's plan to escape in the final scene? After being locked up in a shack for a week, we find out the horrifying truth. Not only was he a thing, but he's creating a super reactor to power an anti-gravity device to make one big jump to civilization. On top of that, it was made of tin cans. That was absolutely ridiculous, and I love it. If you were the thing, what would be your plan to escape? Yeah, probably jumping to North America as well would be my one object there.
Yeah, I would just morph into somebody with big old legs. I would write a story about a guy with big legs that could jump across, and then that would give me the idea to turn into a guy with big legs.
But I think they explained somewhere in this book that like they couldn't just imagine anything and then turn into that. At some point, they do go out of their way to be like, it can't just be a fantastical thing. It's like an Animorphs rule set where you have to actually understand the animal.
I really do like the exposition of the story. It feels like a lot of the time of like a D&D sort of dungeon master, like trying to explain to the players of like, no, you can't do this. No, you can't do this. Right. No, stop asking. No. Yeah.
I do. Yes. I love the weird twist of he's building a anti-gravity jump pack type
Dark
thing.
Trooper, the things that he uses.
Yeah, exactly. But then the part that's crazy is they talk about like, oh, he's using atomic power to do it. And I was like, okay, yeah. And I was like, wait, 1938? Like before the atomic bomb, I really had to dig into like, how does this work? And it turns out like in 1932, Rutherford apparently discovered that splitting atoms released energy. So the idea of like energy in atoms was around just 6 years before that. So it's like, okay, there's a weird timestamp because it's just a weird thing to place in this pre-World War II era.
There's like and there's the passage in like in terms of what Campbell knows is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Right? Like, yeah, because later in the book or like there's a paragraph where it's like, so basically this alien just understands how to use our materials way better than we do. Hence this Folgers can jump pack thing he makes. But there's also, like, speaking of splitting the atom, was it? Yeah, it was in the 51 movie. Someone made a dick comment. I think Dr. Carrington said, he's like, this could be the next splitting the atom. And then someone, I think it was one of the lieutenants was like, yeah, look how that turned out.
Yep. Right.
I think it's the journalist that says that, right?
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of sarcastic dicks, that guy, yeah.
Yeah.
Scotty, no.
Okay, to be fair, though, everyone picked on the scientist in that movie, and he deserved it. Like, that dude was a Captain Nemo looking ass motherfucker.
All right.
He did not look like a scientist.
No.
Are we to the point where we start talking about The Thing from Another World, the 1951 film?
Sure.
Okay, great. Let's do it, because there's a lot of questions about this film, how it came to be, its legacy, all that fun stuff, and we have a special guest to help set it up. I'll admit them into the Zoom call, and maybe they can hear us. Hello?
Okay, I hear you.
Oh my gosh. Okay, hang on. There's still so much echo.
I recognize the voice, though.
Oh, you do?
Mm-hmm.
Is that sincere?
Yeah, I thought so.
I bet you're wrong.
Oh, yeah.
We've got you.
Okay.
Oh my gosh. All right. Fantastic.
Right. How does that work?
It's
perfect.
No, that's totally fair. Ladies and gentlemen, we have as our special guest right now, Chris, is it Nyby?
That's right, Nyby.
Welcome to the show, sir. This is the son of the director of The Thing from Another World from 1951.
Hello there.
Welcome.
Totally what I thought it was.
Thank you. Yeah, you nailed it, Mike. You're spot on with your prediction. Thank you. A relative of yours reached out of the blue once they learned that we were doing this, the deepest dive on your father's film, and he said, hey, I think I could line up an interesting interview. So thanks for jumping on. I'd imagine you don't get too many opportunities to talk about this film, do you?
Not really. No. And it just sounded interesting. My cousin, Mike Nyby, emailed me and said that you guys were doing this exploration of The Thing. So I contacted you, and I would like to share whatever information I could, give you.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Awesome.
you're a director yourself, right? Following in your father's footsteps?
Yeah. I fooled him for a long time, but I retired a few years ago. And,
But I looked you up. You directed some episodes of Walker, Texas Ranger.
yep.
A-Team?
Yeah.
And a show that we just talked about earlier in this discussion, Battlestar Galactica, the 70s version.
Yeah, I did that first season. I did about 6 of those or 7, something like that.
Oh my God, that's amazing. So how often does the thing come up in your life?
Rarely, but every once in a while, somebody will bring it up, or something like this will happen. Somebody would maybe be writing a book about science fiction, or things like that. So,
Yeah,
but rarely.
do you enjoy the film? Have you watched it recently? Did you watch it a lot back in the day? What's your history with the film itself here?
I've watched it. I remember going to the theater and seeing it when I was, I think, 10 years old, and of course it scared the living daylights out of me. And then over the years I've seen it. I haven't seen it in a couple of years, but I think it still holds up in a lot of ways. Dad said that when they made that film, which was 70 years ago, the audience was a reading and radio audience. So they used their imagination a little more than perhaps, I'm not degrading the audiences today, but they would, so a lot of things was left up to the audience's imagination. The sound, the Geiger counter, and I always thought that was a pretty good observation.
Yeah. How much insight do you have into the production of the film? Did you talk to your dad much about it?
Some, I know that they filmed in a refrigerated building in downtown Los Angeles, so they could get the steam, especially when they were in the corridors between the pods, they'd get the steam out of their mouths. And so they were actually in a cold environment. And he also, I think, let's see, one of the faux pas in it, if when you look at it again, is when they blow up the saucer with the thermite bombs or something.
Yeah.
They were supposed to do it late in the afternoon. It was at a movie ranch out in San Fernando Valley, and I think I even went out there as a kid and saw it. I mean, the snow was salt, and they had a big sight or a sky behind, and kind of blocking the hills, and but it rained, and they couldn't do it. So the explosive over the weekend sat in the in the saucer, and they went back to blow it up, and the explosion was so big that the camera that tilted up and followed the ball of flame up went off the cyc. So if you look at the movie, you can actually see the line of the the cyc as it goes up into the sky. So
that's perfect.
Anyway.
I would love to talk about the special effects, if you can even call it that, I guess. But the fire sequence. Did you talk to your dad much about that? Was that just a nightmare to film? Do you have any insight into how they filmed that?
I think that was, because those were the days. Of course, I worked in the days without CGI too. Computer generated imagery. It was difficult, and you mean the ending sequence when they fry the carrot?
Or even like in the middle when they're throwing the gasoline on him and he's stumbling around the room.
Those are all, that was always difficult. He didn't really talk about it, but those are difficult scenes to film, obviously. Yeah.
What did your dad talk about in regards to the film?
He which I think he's been quoted many times, because some people thought that Howard Hawks perhaps really directed it, but Dad was Howard Hawks's disciple, so to speak. He was his film editor on 3 pictures, To Have and Have Not, The Big Sleep, and Red River. And so he really knew Hawks' style. And Hawks was not always on the set, but when he was there, he'd make suggestions. And his dad said, if you were studying under Rembrandt and he made a suggestion, I think he would just kind of said what Rembrandt would have done,
Right. So it's one of those things that's been debated a long time. Like, oh, okay, Howard Hawks actually directed this. But the truth is yeah, your dad, it was his first time directing a film. And so he's going to ask this expert that he's working with that's producing the film a question every now and again, right? It only makes sense.
Absolutely, And I think the reason Hawks gave him, and this is a little supposition on my part, but I understand they made the movie because they were all together to do a picture called The Big Sky with Kirk Douglas, and it was about the riverboats in the Northwest. And they had an early winter up in the Grand Tetons, so they weren't able to film the picture, but they had a crew together. They had some actors, and Dewey Martin appears in both of them. He appears in The Big Sky and in The Thing. So he had the script, and he asked my father if he would like to direct it. He wanted, Hawks wanted to keep the crew together. And so they did, and it was pretty much shot in Los Angeles, except they did some exteriors, I think, up in Montana, around Cutbank, Montana. Some of the aerials with the C-47 landing, I think.
Yeah. Do you have any insight into why the film and the monster in particular is so different from the original short story?
Gosh, I don't know that. I
Okay.
don't know the answer to that. I do know that the style of the film is very, as they say, Hawksian,
right?
With the overlapping dialogue and underplaying of the characters, which was a trademark of Howard Hawks, and it was difficult for actors to do. It's the way a lot of people talk anyway, is to overlap. When you got a thought, you just cut in. But everything was underplayed. All the characters, nobody showed any true fear. Even they're walking around with that Geiger counter. I think I'd say, they'd be a little more nervous, but it allowed to transfer that fear, I think, into the audience.
Yeah. Do you know your dad's thoughts on the 1982 version from John Carpenter?
Not much. He did, and I went to the screening. It was in Venice, California, and they ran the movie, and they ran both films. Dad spoke, and I think my wife and I went out there, but I think he was questioned about Hawks' influence and so forth, but it was basically the same thing. He was there. Dad was the director, and I think even Bill Self, who was one of the actors in it, said, Dad, Kris was the director, and Hawks was the boss, but,
Yeah, of course. Okay, so you don't remember any good stories of him talking about discussing things with John Carpenter or any interactions between those two outside of the screening?
No, I don't. No. Oh, I have a little prop here.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, this little guy was a model that was made when they were trying to discuss what they were going to do with the monster.
Yeah.
They made this plaster cast, which of course was Jim Arness, and but I think it's the only one around. But he's got the hands with the little things up on his knuckles, the little horny deals.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, but I
it just looks like the Heisman Trophy. It's
yeah, it should have a little plaque on the bottom. Thank you so much.
Oh, that's awesome. Is that the main keepsake you have from the film?
Yeah, we did have. I think my brother and I both had the rubber hands that Jim Arness wore, and then they put on the table when it was doing coming alive. And I think they just deteriorated over the years. I don't know what we did.
Oh, that sucks.
They were kids.
Yeah. Well, that's fine.
Ben's been dodging the most important question here, which is the phrase "holy cats" is exclaimed multiple times in the film, and I want to know where that came from. If that was part of your household or anything, "holy cats" stuck out to me.
No, it wasn't something. That's funny because it wasn't something. Sometimes my father would slip something in, but no, that wasn't. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay.
No. And I know there was, where would I say? There was somebody that brought up a couple of years back saying, this was at the beginning of the Cold War, and when the reporter at the end is saying, "Keep your eyes to the sky, keep a lookout," the threat is there, that it was some sort of communist threat. That the thing was supposedly representative of communism.
Yeah, what do you think about that?
I don't think that was true. I think they were just trying to make a good movie, and in most cases, I think that's the case. And I think they put a pretty good picture together in their time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, we're still talking about it 70 years later, so hats off to your dad, sir.
That's true. That's great. If we could all do something like that, it'd be terrific.
Yeah.
So.
Well, hey, thank you so much for calling in. We're honored by your presence, sir.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm honored to be a guest on your show, and I'm glad we got it all working, and it didn't sound like I was 20,000 leagues under the sea.
It helps. Thank you so much. There it is, ladies and gentlemen, Chris Nyby.
Yeah.
That was.
He sounded like Tim Curry with those echoes at first.
Oh, that's so funny. Mike was so confident he knew who that was going to be.
Oh, is that Kris?
Oh, wait, is that the director of A-Team, Chris Nyby, that I hear coming through my
head? Weird. It sounds like my buddy who did a few Walker, Texas Ranger episodes.
That's cool. Well, hopefully there's a little more backstory there for where this thing is coming from. But hey, hope you're ready for the deepest dive on The Thing from Another World, 1951 classic horror film here, directed, of course, by Christian Nyby. Produced by Howard Hawks, who goes back, with the original Scarface was a Howard Hawks production. We all watched this thing, second time for me, first time for y'all. I'm very curious how this sat with everybody. JV, what'd you think about this movie?
Sorry, while you get the ball rolling, I'm going to sprint to the bathroom and be right back.
A little suspicious, but yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Go for it.
It's definitely something I appreciated more than I necessarily loved.
One of those.
It's like putting on the glasses of like, I'm an audience member in 1951. It's pretty cool, especially like the fire scene.
Oh my God.
I really want to know how they did that, because that seems dangerous by today's standards, and like even more dangerous back then, like just the way they filmed that.
Oh my God. Yeah. We can talk about it later for sure.
But it's so hard to like go to that loving The Thing from 1982, and even the story, because I feel like this is the piece of media that diverts most from like what I love about that story, like the paranoia, just sort of like the inner dread of like, oh, am I the Thing? Is my best friend the Thing?
Right.
Of being, just in this sort of otherworldly place. Like I feel like it's like the basic like tenets of the story are there, but it's very much at the end of the day, it's a UFO alien sort of story that's sort of matches up with the other alien UFO stories from that time of like, oh, it's an extraterrestrial monster that walks around. It's more like the monster's more Frankenstein than it is like a body snatcher.
Yes.
It is very Frankenstein. It is like straight up a monster movie for sure.
Yeah. It definitely feels more like a monster movie, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but the things that I love about the story and that I love about the 1982 version of the movie aren't in there, basically. Yes. But I still appreciate a lot of what it's doing and a lot of what it accomplished, especially special effects wise. But it's not what I want, I guess.
Yeah,
the setting is still great. Yeah. Like the Arctic setting and the mysterious discovery, like all that stuff played really well.
Yeah, so
it definitely it feels weird too that there are a bunch of elements in there that I'm not crazy about, and I wonder like why they're in there if they're like mandated. Like the romance story, like
right.
That's kind of weird. That doesn't really fit in here. It feels more like they were going for an action adventure monster movie than necessarily something that's like full on horror. But I did like the Geiger counter though. I really like that idea because you see that be taken forth in something like Alien with the motion tracker.
Okay.
Like, that's a cool thing.
Alien's your favorite movie of all time, so I wanted to run this by you because there's a video that I watched with James Cameron talking about this film, The Thing from Another World. And he in that says like, yeah, the Geiger counter is straight up what I use as inspiration for tracking the aliens in Aliens. And I was trying to remember like, no, in the first Alien they have that as well. So do you think he's just channeling that Ridley Scott also is taking it from The Thing?
Yeah, because it is in the first one. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not sure what James Cameron meant by that.
Well, we have a surprise.
If he was taking credit for it.
Hang on, we have a special guest, JV. James Cameron's son's here to answer whether or not that was actually inspired by Jimmy Cams. What do you think?
Jimmy Cams. Great to be here.
Wow, what do you recall?
So happy.
What do you recall from the filming of Aliens?
Yeah, Ridley Scott that was my idea, not his. Ridley Scott didn't know what the hell he was doing.
So you're saying,
counter was all me.
Wow.
I'm sorry, my dad.
Great. Well, we'll have to let you go. Goodbye, Jimmy.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Cool.
That's crazy, dude.
Well, I mean, there's the answer. We got the answer we were looking for.
That's really all you could hope for.
Yeah.
Mike,
right.
what'd you think of the film?
I had a blast watching it. I had no idea what they were doing with the story. Like I didn't look up anything about it at all. So the fact that it was this Frankenstein vegetable man, the idea of him coming from a planet, as I understand it, where instead of evolving from like simple vertebrates, they evolved from plants.
Right.
It was a very weird, like, it was the same thing with the book almost. They kind of really started to figure it out. Even more so in the movie, they somehow figured this out easily. It's like, his tissue is that of a vegetable. I was like, that doesn't sound very scary. But then he's like, so basically you can't really kill it because it can freeze and come back to life. It needs, and then of course you figure out you can burn it. But I had no idea it was more of like a Frankenstein monster. I thought
it definitely. Oh, go ahead.
No. I felt like the romance felt forced. I didn't particularly buy all of the characters all that well because some of them felt like they were like the captain himself was very much like that kind of Cary Grant kind of romantic figure of the time, I would say. And then, Dr. Carrington, I just
so awesome.
Wasn't on board with him.
He's so silly. I love him.
They couldn't decide if he was a scientist or a dandy or what. Like, they just couldn't figure it out. It was very weird.
His voice, he's so serious all the time. His weird pants, he has like kind of like these Zumba pants in one scene.
Yeah, they look like I'm not sure if it's just the black and white or whatever, but they just look like straight up like sweatpants you buy at like Forever 21 or something.
Yeah.
I loved him. His whole point of view was so spelled out, and he was like, at the end, this scientific discovery is more important than any of our lives, and we need to be prepared to throw ourselves.
And everyone else in the room is looking at him like, no.
Are you out of your mind? Yeah, absolutely. He has that.
Very fun to watch, I think.
Yes, yeah, he has that line, where he says like, for the sake of the human brain, we all need to take this for the team, basically, which is so sweet. I was on Carrington's side personally. Okay, so broad strokes, if you didn't watch the film, it starts a little bit like the story in that, all right, we got this, well, even that there's a lot of differences. Basically, it's in the Arctic instead of the Antarctic, and they find the alien remains, and then it's thawed mistakenly, and it turns out to be a Frankenstein monster. And there's no relation to the Thing in terms of its power set. It feels like, the person that adapted this film from the original story, who also went on to write like Ocean's 11 and stuff, that they just had this story, or the studio had this story about like a vegetable monster or something. And then they just slammed these two together. Or maybe it was a weird case of like...
beef lobby paid for.
What's that?
The beef lobby paid for them to make an anti-vegetable movie. Yeah.
It's all propaganda.
Could be. Or maybe just like they barely read the original story. It's like, it's a snowy monster movie. Let's write that film. Go. Right?
But I do feel as if the characters in this movie vacillate wildly between intelligent and stupid more than any other version of the story.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, they're smart in the way that they figured out exactly how this monster works almost immediately. They're smart in the sense of like Carrington can, think big picture wise, but also they think that it's a good idea to just toss kerosene around this wooden room. They think that they stumble upon the first ever UFO and they think thermite on the ice right above it is a good idea. And I don't know, like it was funny to me. Like, that's why I enjoyed the journalist character, because he's kind of like the audience surrogate. He's like, what are you doing? Why did you do this? I was really enjoyed his character, which I had no idea. Again, there's a journalist involved, but that's a weird beat to have. I want to point out for a journalist. The Anchorage Arctic beat. What stories does he normally come across?
I know, because he's like, I need a story. I gotta find a story, or my editor's gonna shoot himself in the head.
My favorite bit about that whole journalist thing is just like, they would have shot him as soon as they saw the UFO. Like, he's like screeching in the back there about, I gotta get my story out to the world. Like, the military would have shot him right in the face.
Well, what's so confusing?
That would have been the end of his arc.
Well, I like the idea of him being like, hey, I got to get the story out. And it's like, nope, Captain said this is on lockdown. That's not going to work. He's like, well, I work to a greater authority, the United States Constitution, freedom of the press. But then he's like, shucks, all right, I guess I won't publish the story yet because I can't reach the outside world. But then he has a line too where he's like, now someone's going to scoop my story. It's like, who else is aware of what's going on over here? But then it's so confusing. Then at the end, when they kill the monster, they kill the alien, then it's like, and go ahead and tell your story to the world now, have at it. And he finally gets to do that, and he just like doesn't say, hey, it's me working for the Alaskan Herald or whatever. He just says, Scotty here, get a load of this, gaggle of reporters, and just like gives the story away then.
He also, like, for just, verbalizing that story for the first time, he nails it pretty well in terms of his prose. But I also just enjoyed the scenes where their commanding officer was trying to get a hold of them through the the radio, the Morse code.
Yeah.
Or no, not Morse code. It would have been like a telegram at that point.
All right, whatever.
Basically the captain, who's the main character, was basically like that guy that just doesn't text the group back. And they're like, hey, what are you doing? Hey, where are you at? Hey, what's the deal with that UFO alien situation? Hey, we'd like to hear some stuff from you. And then they're just laughing about it, flipping pages, reading it out. And then they don't respond at that point.
Yeah, I do like too that then they get those messages from the higher ups. He's like, you'll want to go ahead and use thermite on the UFO. It's like after they blew it up. And then Scotty's like, that's what I like about the Army. Nice and smart.
I like when they're talking about, like, they're laughing about report the full measurements of the craft. That was the funniest moment of the film to me, when they were like, yeah, well, obviously it's totaled.
Yeah.
We can't do it. Yeah, I like too that they have that line where they're flying back. And Scotty says something like, yeah, they'll probably make you a general for destroying evidence that the Air Force is wrong, that UFOs don't exist, by the way. So Scotty has a couple of good lines in there. But before I forget, talking about the radio, that was one of my favorite things about the book, was when they were talking about communicating with the outside world, and they're like, if we say SOS, there's an alien down here, they're going to come down here, which is going to spread the thing to the rest of the world. But if we go radio silent, then they're going to send a rescue party. So what we need to do is keep sending just enough messages out into the world to make them not come down and check on us, which is like just an awesome sci-fi conundrum.
Yeah, because then they're like, well, the people who are smart enough to know that something's up will know that we are trying to deter them, and the people who are dumb enough won't notice anyway. So we'll have our bases covered as long as we play act this all kosher situation, then it's fine.
Yeah. It's just such like a weird like mixture of genres that never gets to horror, and like that's honestly fine, but it's just coming from like the thing 1982 to watching this and being hit with like action adventure romantic comedy sort of thing is so strange when you consider like the foundation of the story and what the story's actually about. It's not necessarily something I'm against, but it's so wild. It's definitely like a movie that feels like it's made up of like pre-assigned parts rather than something that's like, like a natural story that's told well, if that makes sense, which makes, that it's a studio movie. It's a studio movie from the 50s. Which,
very marketable version of what the story is.
Yeah, it is a movie that, it moves along. I think it moves surprisingly well for a movie this old. I think it's entertaining. Just, by the way, to zoom out even further, like, this is my second time seeing the movie. I liked it slightly less than the first time, but the first time was like ideal, where it was at the Heights Theater in Columbia Heights, Minnesota during like a Halloween thing. And Tim Curry and I forget who else was there, watched it in like an almost packed theater, watching it the first time, and it killed. Like the jokes still landed, the jump scares still landed. So I had like this very, very positive memory of this movie in my mind. And I'm watching it and it's like, I still think this movie's cool. And I understand people being frustrated by like, oh, it's not the adaptation that we wanted. It's not the original story. It's like, yeah, that's fair. We get like the greatest adaptation possible in 1982. So there's nothing to be angry about here. It's just like this interesting anomaly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's like, you know, I don't love it, the movie, but I'm not holding it against it for not being the 1982 thing. You know, because that's kind of absurd, right?
Yes.
Like, oh, this other adaptation isn't the exact same as like, you know, one of the greatest horror movies ever made. Yeah, right. It's kind of a silly thing.
Yes, but to get back to your point, JB, about like, you know, what is this about? I did find myself trying to figure that out too, because it's like, it moves along so well, but it's just about taking down the threat. But then you stop and think about like, so it's about the captain wanting to move in with the woman, but being scared? Like, or it's about the trouble of following commands from higher ups, which I guess is kind of what everybody's dealing with. You know what? It's about the monster. It's a monster movie, everybody.
It's a strange thing, though, because even though like it's not hard, it's still a monster movie, and I never for once worried about any of the characters. You know, like they always felt smart or invincible. Like even like the only two characters I think who get killed in the movie or killed off screen, right? They're not even minor characters. They're just like, oh, two of our soldiers got eaten, so our dogs got killed.
Well, but then the gruesome thing that also happened off screen was those two scientists were hung from the ceiling of the greenhouse as blood bags. That was kind of gruesome, despite being off camera. I was like, ew. Yeah. And they showed the captain open the door and look up at them. He's like, yeah, he wasn't lying. They're up there.
He wasn't lying. Yeah. There's let's see, where was that part about the dog? Somebody wrote in about Joe Mama wrote in. I don't know if this is Joe Mama specifically, Mike Mahardy, but anyways, they wrote in saying, I spent most of the movie waiting for the transformation moment I never got. When they find the dog in the greenhouse, I got excited. Here it is. It turned into a dog. Nope. It just sucked the life out of it. Cool, I guess. I did like the dialogue in the movie.
That was, knowing nothing about this, the actual biggest laugh of the night for sure was the shot where they're like, oh, the thing got away or whatever, and they look out the door and it's just like batting away dogs out in the distance.
Yeah, it's like spiking them on the ground. And
yeah. We're doing a very different concept here.
Suplexing ducks. But there's even like, when they go out and find the hand and it's like underneath one of those dogs, I was like, oh, is this some weird fusion thing that I forgot about? But it's like, no, it's actually just this vegetable hand that's just laying underneath a dog. Whereas in the book, it's so much about like human hands coming out of dog parts and all that fun stuff.
One constant between 51 and 82 was the idea that the monster is smart enough to turn the heat off. In order to, I think in both cases, it's like, or like, again, not to talk too much about the 82 movie, but maybe for different reasons. But in 51, it's like, well, it knows that if it's frozen, it can survive, but it knows that they won't be able to, or it seems to know that. But it's also like it wants to preserve this army that it's gonna, that it's already growing, so to speak.
Yeah.
Which that was the scene with the stethoscope to the little seedling or whatever it was. That got me. The way the guy recoiled and like put his face in his hands, like the scream. What does he say? The screaming of babies or something?
It's almost the wail of a newborn child who's hungry. No, that's what the guy who's... Okay, so we got to zoom out for people that didn't watch this, which is probably the majority of the people here. So what this is it's a vegetable monster. Of course, the zoom out, everybody. It's a vegetable monster. It's a super carrot.
It's lettuce Frankenstein.
Yes. And then the doctor is falling in love with it, and just how fascinating it is. We need to preserve this creature. You need to obey your orders not to harm this alien because it can teach us so much about life, and it's smarter than us and it's better than us, yada, yada, yada. You know how doctors were in the 50s. And so then he starts growing new little seedlings based on the remains of the hand that they had from the thing. And then there's just like these little plants that are these weird thriving pea pods. Yeah. And then he like... After pulling a power move of being like, I was up till 2 a.m. working on this. I couldn't possibly read over my notes. Lady, do you want to read my notes for me? And then she explains all of his thought processes. But then he goes on to show off the actual child or children plants that are growing. And then there's a stethoscope on those things. And then they says, almost the wail of a newborn child who's hungry. The scientist says, that's the way I would have described it. I was just going to say that. The wail of a newborn child who's hungry.
Somewhere.
Yeah. Please read more of my notes, please.
Speaking of sound effects, I thought it was interesting that of the things that did carry over, both the story and this movie describe the sound that the thing makes as mewing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, really?
Like a kitten or something, almost like a scared kitten.
Yeah, it's a weird choice.
Yeah.
Even when adapting it to be a Frankenstein-y monster, it still is just mewing.
But then it's just, is it mewing when it's on fire? It's like, it's very, if that's mewing, I don't know from mewing. Okay, Dustin Smith writes in saying, I think the film itself has a fair amount of creepiness and suspense to it. It's disappointing that the creature is reduced to a super strong carrot, an average movie monster, when the original creature and premise was so much more interesting. With that major change, it makes it more of a classic fun film, but a really poor adaptation. I get it, yes, I think that's a great way of looking at it, Dustin. When you're looking at it specifically for the adaptation angle, I think that's fair.
But maybe there's a reason they called it something completely different.
Yeah.
Not the same title.
I do not agree. I mean, I do not disagree with that core statement, but it's also one of those things of like, okay, they're making an adaptation of this movie in so it comes out in 1951. They're making it, 1950 maybe?
Yeah.
With how quick they turn those movies around, studio films around. What is the reasonable adaptation that lives up to the original story, I guess, made within the constraints of the time and of the technology? Like, I don't know what that looks like.
I think, forget technology. You don't need to go, full frontal with the thing. Like, the beauty of the story of the thing is you just need to have a group of people freaking out. You don't need that tech just to have some interesting dialogue about who to trust.
So you're thinking like Twilight Zone kind of like episode of something like hiding more than showing? I'm
just saying it would be so much more compelling even if there was no special effects and no monsters. It was just somebody in this room is a monster secretly. So yeah, I think it's possible.
I think that's fair. But I don't think it's a bad adaptation. I don't think it's a bad adaptation, I guess, ultimately. Like, especially when we have the other one. Maybe if we didn't have the other one, that'd be the thing. But for now, it's like, yeah, I'm fine with this.
But imagine
if this was the only adaptation, I'd be I'd be pretty pissed. But,
yeah, imagine being like the biggest fan of Who Goes There, and then you go to the theater to see the thing from another world. Like, here we go, baby. It'd be like seeing that, Avatar: Last Airbender film in theaters. Like, what is this crap?
We don't have to talk about that.
Oh, sorry, I guess we don't. Darkfish Days wrote in with a theory. He says, 1951, in the middle of McCarthyism. True. The hearings were in 54, but it's still ramping up to that era for sure. Seems like the best and worst time to adapt a story about an alien imitating humans. The novella could be a great metaphor for communist paranoia, but maybe for that same reason that the film's premise was changed. I can only imagine that someone would have been blacklisted if they kept the original alien concept. I don't think so. I don't think so.
Yeah, because within the context of the movie, then it becomes like it's not sympathetic to communism, right? Like, it was films that are sympathetic to communism, or people who thought that films were sympathetic to communism, or the writers were sympathetic to communism. That's when they got blacklisted.
And it seems
when things got changed. Like, then this would just be propaganda that studios would be into.
Yeah, it seems like who we want as the protagonist of this film would just be McCarthy accusing everybody. Like, that's the movie we want. So we're on his team here, buddy.
They'd be in trouble if it was like this. There's a monster among us. Everybody was like, "Oh, rad, nice."
That sweet red blood of his. Dan Willie writes in and says, having never seen the 1951 movie or read the short story, I expected the connective tissue to be the distrust and paranoia that a shape-shifting threat presents. But instead, it's the setting. The isolation and inherent danger of the outside surroundings give both the book and film a sense of claustrophobia and desperation. The stories seem like a spiritual successor to some of H.P. Lovecraft's stories that draw on the same setting, like At the Mountains of Madness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because even for the monster itself, I mean, in most versions of the story, the monster itself could not have landed on a worse place on Earth. And they say in the movie, it's like, well, he's going to be back. This is the only actual growing Earth for miles around. If he is, in fact, a vegetable, as we just figured out in a couple hours, then he's going to be back in this greenhouse. So, of course, the scientists all decide to keep watch for this, for all intents and purposes, homicidal alien. Of course, two of them get strung up. But even for the alien, it was like the outside is not a hospitable place.
Right. And I like that other bit of lore from the book that I believe makes it clear that the reason the alien crashed there was the magnetic pole. Like, it was some magnetic interference that was drawn to the South Pole because of that. So it was like, worst case scenario for that stupid alien. That was actually the original title of Who Goes There, was That Stupid Alien.
Yeah.
Gabriel Loke Loke writes in, says, I found the original movie to be really disheartening. There's almost no reason the movie should be set in the North Pole. The original story is set in Antarctica, which makes sense as it sets up the fact that this expedition is completely alone and isolated from the rest of the world, which in turn sets up a great atmosphere of tension and horror in its own right, but also sets up the idea that the scientists can't let the thing escape into civilization or it will take over the entire world. It feels like anybody could just take a plane to the North Pole if they wanted to here. I think the movie would have been a pretty good schlocky sci-fi movie had it been completely unrelated to the original story, and it's enjoyable from that perspective, but it's just not the thing.
Yeah, if they didn't say right at the beginning, based on who goes there, I would have probably lost the connection after this alien crashed in the snow. After that, it would have been, I guess they're kind of loosely related, but it's almost like that source material is holding it back from being a fun, campy sci-fi movie, which I found it still to be. But yeah, it's almost like given its legacy, almost hurt it a bit. But to JV's point, it definitely feels like there's the romantic interest. There's there's this, for all intents and purposes, this like bronze statue of a man as the main character, as they say. But it feels like very kind of patchwork of things that were working well at the time, especially like Howard Hawks. Like, I mean, a lot of his movies are obviously, the guy knew what he was doing, but a lot of his other movies were very much like studio hits, to the point where it's like I wouldn't be surprised to see that some of that oversight that Chris was saying, wasn't, or that was pretty welcome in terms of Nyby's direction. A lot of it, I wouldn't be surprised to see that was like actually just kind of mandated from a commercial standpoint. But I enjoyed it, like literally for the camp itself.
But the in terms of changes, I love in the original story how the alien crashed there, 20 million years ago or whatever? Like, it's been down there for so long. I think it's fascinating. And here, it's like, no, it crashed yesterday. And we're going to go check it out right now, which makes it confusing for like, why is there like 3 feet of ice on top of the alien then? Like, what's going on here? I didn't quite understand how that works.
Do they try to explain that by like, no, because remember they said like what could melt that much ice that quickly, and then it just froze over again because it's the Arctic, I would imagine. Right. But I really enjoyed the like the really deep bass notes and like kind of eerie noise that comes up when they start to form that circle. It's like, let's try to figure out the shape of this thing. It's like bum bum, and then the journalist like, we found one. We finally got one. We bagged ourselves a UFO.
And then he immediately asks the scientist guy, goes, "Where's it from?" He's like, "What? You're standing in a circle with him. He doesn't know anything." But yeah, that's probably one of the highlights of the movie. Maybe the point that gave me goosebumps is that scene where they're like, let's actually figure out the shape of this thing, which makes no sense, but whatever. Even like when they see the part of the craft sticking out of the ice and they're like, look at this, it's part of an airplane. What type of metal is that? Like, who the hell cares if you think it's an airplane? But figure out the shape of this thing. They all circle around it and then realize they're standing in a circle, and the music just hits so hard. It's awesome.
Yeah, I thought that was a super clever moment.
Yeah. And it's in Halloween. They're watching that scene on TV in the original Halloween. Fun fact for John Carpenter fans out there. Let's see, what else we got? Talking about the setting. I really like the sense in this movie that there's a lot of history and like a sense of community and tension with everybody at this camp. Like that the reporters coming into this thing, but like right when they land, it's just immediately this, relationship that they're trying to repair is being picked back up. Everybody knows each other a little bit. I think it works well for just that vibe of we have a small camp here and you're being injected into it all of a sudden.
Yeah, Captain Henry was still embarrassed because last time he was there, apparently he got super drunk and didn't want everybody talking about it, but also was super embarrassed about his relationship with this woman.
Yeah.
I didn't fully get it all, but it definitely felt like there was some.
It's very interesting to think about this, and again, we can talk about this more next episode, but comparing the relationships at this camp versus the relationships in the 1982 version of the camp, like, not diving too much into spoilers, but it feels more standoffish in the 1982. Like, no, everyone's been stuck with each other for a really long time. No one really likes each other that much. And in here, it feels like an episode of MASH. Of like, even like the people that like, like they're annoyed with each other, they still get along, because they have to. They still have fun and stuff. And there's still like this undercurrent of like, okay, we have to deal with this bullshit, but we all get along. We're all friends, sort of thing. Right. It's not in the later version.
Yeah. What'd you all think of Nikki, the main lady in the film? I liked her, but it's kind of like that easy opening of a little bit like Marion and Indiana Jones, where it's like, she can drink a lot, so she's cool. But did you all have a read on her?
She was fine.
Yeah.
Like, that's how I feel about pretty much all of them. The only character that really left like a strong impression on me, and it wasn't necessarily a positive one, was the doctor and the journalist. I like the doctor and the journalist as characters because they, the doctor's super annoying and it's easy to hate him, but the journalist was like genuinely funny. I feel like he had the best lines in the movie.
Yeah. There are definitely times. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
I didn't find her to be too impressionable, or I wasn't too impressed by her, but it was funny because when they first mentioned, they're all making fun of Captain Henry for wanting to go back for quote unquote the pinup doll of a girl that's up there. And when they get there, there's the older woman who I think she's just kind of a caretaker. I thought that's who they were talking about. I was like, oh, interesting. Okay, this is her. And Captain Henry's with her, maybe? Not realizing that there was a totally separate other woman. I'm just used to like the all male camps from the 31 or the 38 version, the 82 version in 2011.
Right.
Threw me for a loop.
Yeah, it's confusing. Wesley Barbary writes in and says, "This is a great film, and I enjoyed watching it with my wife. Quit bragging. However, I couldn't stop discussing how we both were super confused about the scene where the captain was tied up and escaped. Was it because they were alone together that he had to be tied up? There was no context, no other mention of this, or them being interested in each other for the rest of the film. Do you think there is a deleted scene that would add more context?" I think you got all the context you need. They're just playful and silly and wanted to drink.
Yeah, I just thought it was awkward flirting.
Yeah, she said, like, do you want a drink? And he said, why don't you tie my hands? Like, I think that's an expression for, like, yes, I really want a drink. But then she did it literally as a joke. But then, of course, he slipped it really easily, and she didn't notice for, like, 30 seconds.
Yeah, I thought there's this cute, playful nature between those two, yeah. Not as intimate or as sexy as that other scene where there's, like, that soldier that comes up to the captain and he's like whispering about how scared that other guy was of the monster in the other room. And he's just
That's Dewey Martin. Yeah.
What's that?
The actor. That's Dewey Martin, the actor. He was in like everything at this time.
Oh, really?
He's like the heartthrob. Yeah.
He just has this weird whispery, flirty tone. It's like, what is this dialogue back and forth?
Right on the electric blanket. I'm really worried. And then, of course, that dude threw the electric blanket on the block of ice, not realizing it was a really weirdly warm blanket. Again, sometimes they're smart, sometimes they're dumb.
Oh, that monster would have been so happy that blanket was thrown on there. I do like, too, not to keep jumping back to the original short story, but I like the idea that the alien was like sentient for 20 million years or whatever, and it's just been like dying to get out of that ice. And I like even this idea where it's like somebody throws that blanket on the ice and it's just like, yes, so I can actually watch everything that happens. I think it's more interesting if it's that way. James Martin writes in and says, "I'm a bit of a classic movie guy and I'd never seen this and I absolutely loved it. What I found most interesting was the dialogue. It was quite unique for the time. Lots of people, quick back and forth, snappy and natural, almost like an early version of Sorkin. I did some reading about Hawks' style and it was a bit of a pioneer in that regard. It's pretty cool." Yeah, pretty cool. That is cool.
I want an Aaron Sorkin directed version of The Thing now. Not because I think it'd be good, but because I just want to see it.
So it's just like a walk and talk, but it's just the Thing on fire, slowly walking and talking about it.
Just like long shots of people walking through hallways and having discussions about local politics while the Thing's like, walking behind it slowly. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if you want hallways, The Thing is your universe of fiction. It is just a hallway-centric world. Let's see here. We have Brian W., who submitted a comment that... I was going to say, on the dialogue front, like, and the idea about it being surprisingly fast and, like, the overlapping dialogue, I do think it's great, and it's helped it age so well. But I read Frank Capra's autobiography years ago, and he was talking about, like, how in an early movie he was working on, he said, like, we filmed it on set and it was totally fine. And then I screened it with hundreds of people and it was like the movie was molasses and it was terrible. And it just felt so slow. And he said that, like, everybody, when he reported back to the rest of the film crew that our movies are too slow in like the 30s and 40s, everyone's like, what are you talking about? It's perfect. It's like life. And he's like, no, it's not. You need to speed all of this up. And so he was saying that, he was trying to claim, like, I'm the pioneer of speeding up film, but it made me think of this comment with the idea of pointing that towards Howard Hawks. And I'm curious between him and Capra, who kind of gets the credit for kind of that speedy overlapping dialogue earlier on.
Who did it faster?
Exactly. Brian W. writes in and says, I love the short story, but that movie was terrible. Brian, come on, man. What are you doing, Brian? But look, he gets me back because he has this specific comment that I literally had written down, which is so specific. It's like he's in my head. He says, Ben, do you think Spielberg was referencing in Jurassic Park when Muldoon and Hammond both are having conversations at the same time in the raptor pit, the scene in The Thing where the guy's talking on the radio over the other guy? Do you know what he's talking about?
I know what he's talking about in Jurassic Park.
Yes. So there's a scene where there's people having the conversation in Jurassic Park by the raptor pit, and they're closer to the camera, but you can hear the conversation in the back. And they do that exact same thing in The Thing here, where the doctor is on the radio talking to people, but you're hearing the conversation that's further away more clear. And I thought about that exact scene from Jurassic Park. So I hope that's a reference, because clearly Spielberg's a fan of this movie. I found a video on YouTube of him talking about how amazing it was and how like audiences weren't accustomed to jump scares like this back then, but like that door shot was just destroying theaters when they open the door and he's standing right there. And then there's also this connection later on. Sean Mills writes in saying that the final line from the reporter, "Watch the skies," Spielberg later took that line, and that was the working title for Close Encounters later on too. For the fun Spielberg connection there. Do you guys have a favorite scene?
The frying the carrot, as it was put, holds up amazingly well.
Oh my God.
That still is like stunning to look at.
It's awesome.
I think you're talking about the end, right, Leo, in the hallway?
The scene before that, the first time they fry him. The scene in the hallway is a bit more like iMovie lightning, a little less impressive.
Yeah, no, I was going to say the same thing. When they set him on fire and they throw the kerosene on him, like that still looks shockingly real and uncomfortable.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Because that's just a dude running around in a flame suit, right?
With all sorts of other actors like around him in the foreground and everything.
Yeah, like that seems like someone should have gotten hurt.
It's
the only
crazy.
thing between I forget her name and him was like a mattress.
Pillow. Yeah,
some like body pillow.
And
then he took a head dive through the shoulder high window into the Arctic. I loved it.
Yeah, that scene is just incredible. So Travis Morgan wrote in about it saying, "Stood out to me the most was the well done sequence of the thing on fire. The lighting and length of the takes especially helped it be a standout moment. I'd still say it holds up today, very much so." Yeah, I think it looks awesome. And in that same video where James Cameron was going on and on about the Geiger counter and stuff, he brought up the interesting point that he says he keeps rewatching this scene because he cannot believe that the way they did it is that that's the only light in the scene, is the fire coming off this actor.
Oh,
if you go back and look at it, like, it's insane to keep the light going on like these super slow cameras back in the day. You just have to keep pouring more gas on this human being. It's insane.
Wow. I hope that guy got paid a lot.
Oh my God, I hope so. And he was also saying that, James Cameron was saying that was like, in his mind, the first like full body burn in film. And it is insane if you go back and watch that scene, because there's cuts and it's him wandering around, but it is just like those actors in the room throwing gasoline on this guy who's already on fire and then hoping they can kind of get away from him in time. It's nuts. And you brought up the lady being in the same room behind the like cushion or whatever, which great safe way to go. But there is a cut there. So it's her holding it up. They do the awesome slash of like the mattress, and it leaves like the flaming claw mark on the mattress, which is a sweet shot. And then in the wide shot, when he's on fire before he jumps out the window, when you can see the mattress in the wide shot there, you can't see underneath it. And I'm wondering if they just had it on strings, because it's like moving a little bit if you really do like a frame by frame thing. So she might not have been in there except for that close up where he slashes it. But
the illusion is so good.
It's incredible.
Right? Yeah.
Also, I love that scene too, because if you rewatch it, the thing, first of all, I'm a sucker for the thing opening doors. Like several times in this movie, he just like opens a doorknob and stands in the doorway. But in this one in particular, he opens that door and just kind of casually looks around the room and like, and they throw the gas on it and torch him, which like makes me side more with the doctor, that like this guy isn't like maybe planning on attacking them. There's no evidence that he is. He's just a guy opening a door and they start him on fire.
It makes me think of Mr. X poking in the safe room in Resident Evil 2.
Another minor detail. I love right when the Geiger counter is going off, and they kind of know from the or they don't know where direction he's coming from, but the Geiger counter is starting to beat more frequently.
Yeah.
Captain Henry casually going into the cafeteria with all these civilians, mind you, saying, "Hey, the monster's on the loose, so stay put." And then he closes the door and goes back into the other room, as if that's like some actionable order they can not panic about. Oh, sweet.
Just there you are.
Part of that was the radio guy when they're like, "Oh, and guns don't work," and they close the door on him, but you can hear him from beyond the door going, "What do you mean guns don't work?" Just trailing away.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good little funny moments in this movie, I think, too. Even like when the guy sees the alien, then runs back to the captain, and he has his gun because he's just shooting at the monster, and he's like talking to the captain. He still has his gun accidentally pointed like directly at the captain, and they don't make a big deal of it. The captain just like takes his gun, just like moves it away so he's not aiming directly at his chest because he's so warmed up.
And then doesn't he slap him twice, and then he's like, "Thanks, I needed that."
Yeah.
Or is that from the book? I think I might be getting that
I think that might be from the book. I don't remember that being in the movie necessarily. Eric,
I think McCready did it to Kana in the book, and then Kana immediately said, "Thanks, I needed that." And I found that funny too.
Eric Angel writes in and says, it's a side effect of just being made in the 50s, but the monster design really made me laugh out loud when you first get to see it. The idea of a plant-based organism going through an evolutionary cycle that mirrors our own is interesting. I wish the movie could have done more with this, especially with the design of the creature. Again, it's the 50s though, so they can only do so much. I would definitely recommend this movie to people though. It was quite enjoyable. Yeah, we talked about the plant stuff. I did look it up, and apparently that whole telegraph vine bit about how plants can communicate with each other, that was nonsense. They just made it up for the movie. It is not really the way that those vines work, but, to each their own. Adam Moran gets to a point that Mike pointed out as well, saying, although in the end I was disappointed with the lack of shape-shifting in the 51 film, I actually found the characters interesting in a sort of pulpy way. Watching them realize they've underestimated the thing's intelligence after it cuts the heat and course correct to outsmart it was actually very cool. And I thought the biology behind the creature was cool. And my favorite line was an intellectual carrot. The mind boggles. Yeah.
Holy cow, that was good.
There was a line.
Every 5 minutes.
Yeah. There was a line in the movie where they say, "What if you can read our minds?" Do you think that's coming from the book? Like the one thing they took from the monster in the book? Let's see. Bob Buell writes in. He's also watching us live with the Backstage Pass. Hello, everybody in the Backstage Pass watching this live. Thank you for being a supporter. Bob Buell says, during the infamous fire scene, the moment the thing kicked down the door and entered the dark room with the snowy Arctic behind him, the first thing I thought of was the famous poster for the Carpenter movie from the 80s. A silhouette of a man with an explosion of light coming from his head. It's not identical, obviously, but it's pretty dang close. Close enough that I figured that was the inspiration behind the iconic poster. There's an article from Screen Rant that lends a little bit of credence, saying that the poster, done by Drew Struzan, who did all the great 80s films, had to be finished very quickly and before the designer ever saw the 80s version of the film. So he was told to go off iconic moments from this 1951 version to make the poster. So maybe a bit of a stretch, but maybe that's where he pulled that image of the thing in the doorway from, which...
I've always wondered what connection that poster had to the movie.
Yeah, I know. It's a bit of a stretch.
82 movie.
Yeah, that's got to be it. Let's see. What do you think about the captain? Jerome wrote in talking about, I wasn't a big fan of the movie, and the idea of the captain just being like this pro-military, white male Christian saver guy was a bit much for him.
Yeah, and like I agree because like my dad loved like Jimmy Stewart and Cary Grant movies, which I grew up on, so it felt very much like he was filling that role just to be the cool-headed straight man of the group.
Yeah,
with the forced romantic interest, but he had way less character than almost anybody. Even Dewey Martin, the guy who was like whispering to him, had some sort of like, he was like the optimistic kind of cheery one. The captain just seemed to be the one who, like, sometimes he was super smart. Like, he seemed to understand most things Dr. Carrington was telling him. Other times he just seemed like about to snap, especially in the scenes with the woman when she's like saying, "Oh, there's that temper." But then, I didn't fully get what his purpose was. I think it was just like as a vehicle for the plot.
It was weird at times because it's like, who am I supposed to be rooting for? Because he's the guy who's kind of like a buzzkill, where he's like, shut Scotty down, the fun character, don't let him do his report. All right, we're going to come into this room. All right, hey, shoot out that window. We got to knock out the window to lower the temperature in here. Like, he's kind of harming the positive aspects of this film in a way where he's, the hero, but at times like, I don't really want to root for this guy. He's kind of messing up what they got going on here. I'm with Carrington. Chris Calkins writes in, of course, and says, I thoroughly enjoyed The Thing from Another World. There was a good tension building throughout the entire movie. But when it came to the big standoff moment, I couldn't help but laugh when Dr. Carrington ran out and tried to plead with the Thing to share its knowledge with them. This Thing hadn't shown any motivation for anything other than trying to kill them all the way, and it just stood there looking at Carrington, waiting for him to finish talking before swatting him aside, and it really got me laughing.
Yeah.
It was a long time that he was like half listening to Carrington before he killed him, or
he was thinking about it.
Yeah.
It was very enjoyable seeing him get swatted.
He did the same
His weird
backhand.
pants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I guess he regrew. Is that the idea? Because
I have no
he
idea.
lost the one outside with the dogs because they found it, and then he had the two later on, I think. But, but speaking of Carrington here, I think Donnie submitted a comment on Patreon saying, I'm always surprised by old films and I'm reminded of how long pop culture has held on to certain themes. In this case, it's the idea of the scientists having no morals and only wanting knowledge, and the likable characters just wanting to burn things down. Yeah, those classic tropes. Watching this film and reading the story back to back made me think of wise words from the one and only, of course, Norm Macdonald, where he was talking about just how all films and media from like the 50s and 60s has not aged that well. Where he's like, I can watch a sitcom from the 50s and like feel no humanity, but then I go read a book from the 1700s and it's like, oh, here's how people think. Here's like a human being. And I think there's a little bit in this film, even though I think largely this film has aged well for a movie from 1951. There's still those weird disconnects that I think you can connect so much more personally to what was going on in the story just because of the medium itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It did feel sterile overall, despite a lot of the weird shit happening.
Yeah. Adam Walker submits a comment saying, hey friends, finally watched the 1951 film not once but twice. It was not at all what I expected. It often felt ridiculous even for a film of its era. I was surprised at the shifts in tone throughout. I could not get over one instant during the final encounter. When the creature was walking towards the group prior to being electrocuted, I was unable to suspend my disbelief at the need to slide a pickaxe across the floor to cause it to quickly step onto the walkway. I fully expected the Thing to briefly stop, raise his hand, wag his figure, and go, nah-uh-uh. It is a funny moment of like, oh crap, he's not in the thing we're going to use to electrocute him. How do we get him there? Just slowly slide a pickaxe across the floor, I guess.
Yeah, it's like make him juke this massive tool.
Yeah.
Just have to show they're truly mentally superior to this thing.
They got it where they want.
Outsmarted it.
They do cut back to the dude who threw it, like as if like to try. Yeah, like look how proud he is.
The Tiger Woods.
Everybody's
Yeah.
like nice, patting him on the back before they fry this thing.
Apparently, the monster, they made a big deal about it in the title. I was wondering why, but it's James Arness. I didn't know who that was, but apparently it's like the main character from Gunsmoke. Yeah, Matt Dillon from Gunsmoke. Which, by the way, I found out they made TV movies of Gunsmoke in the 90s, and James Arness was still playing Matt Dillon in the 90s, which...
I mean, there's a certain age demographic that loves Gunsmoke like no other show.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Chris Nyby produced it.
And let's get him on the line. Actually, I think the director of the film, I think he did actually direct some Gunsmoke. He also directed 2 episodes of The Twilight Zone. The one with Carol Burnett, Cavender is Coming, and then Showdown with Rance McGrew, which are both like pretty funny episodes, but not that great. Sean Mills writes in and said, I thought there were a few moments that were genuinely terrifying, including when they opened the greenhouse door, finding the sled dog in the box, and counting the radiation on the Geiger counter to track the monster's movements. I'm glad it worked. I'm glad that atmosphere got you there. Other things we haven't touched on. Oh, I love, my favorite character of this movie is Dr. Chapman, who's like that super tall, understated guy, where he's like, only the front and back door, they're fully corrugated iron. He says like this awesome, calm tone. I wanted more of that dude.
Is that the guy that's like super tall? He looks like the giant from Twin Peaks.
He should have played the alien. Like he looked like a monster. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was the one like siding with the military the whole time. And then also in a better movie, when you were talking about the clothes the Thing was wearing, in a better movie that had more attention to detail and, like fewer holes, I would have thought maybe the alien got that guy's clothes. That's why they have this massively tall guy on their side. But I was like, no way.
Yeah.
Well, he also looks like the way he's dressed kind of looks like a Nod character from Command and Conquer, like that uniform.
That's perfect. Yeah. When you talk about a smarter movie, I was thinking watching this, like maybe it still is the thing we know from Who Goes There, and it is slowly possessing all these people and taking over the entire camp. It's just that in this version of the story, they don't realize that, you know? So maybe like the tall guy was in cahoots with the thing the whole time, right?
That'd be cool. And
like, ooh, the reason the lady's like, come live with me, let's live together. Guess what? You live with a woman, gonna be the thing. That's the takeaway they want you to.
Trying to isolate them.
That's right. Let's see. I think that's it for big comments. Thanks to everybody that submitted a comment about The Thing from Another World and Who Goes There. We appreciate it. Whew. Did we cover it all? Did we hit all the beats?
Yeah, I think so for this one at least.
Yeah. Oh, there is one more. Derek Maldonado. He says that Who Goes There is up there with, quote, All You Zombies as a personal favorite title for a classic sci-fi short story.
All You Zombies.
I didn't know there's a short story called All You Zombies, but that's funny. Do you guys like Who Goes There as a title? It didn't really work for me.
I think that's good.
Yeah.
Does it fit?
I like it.
There's not really a scene in the book where they're like, halt, who goes there?
It's like in the Middle Ages or even after that, they would shout to people who are approaching like a gate or something. Like, who is that? Like, identify yourself so we know it's safe. I think it works a little bit on certain levels.
Yeah.
I think I would even take, you know, what they ended up calling the longer version of the book of Frozen Hell. I think that's maybe better than Who Goes There, but you know what, teach their own. All right. Thanks to everybody that supports us on Patreon. If you're listening to the podcast version, thank you so much. I hope you're ready for next week's episode on The Thing from 1982. We're doing the biggie. We would love to read your comment on that episode. If you also love The Thing from 1982, support us at any tier on Patreon and submit a comment and we'll read it on the show. As always, the more specific, the better. If it's a, multi-paragraph chunk talking about your review of the film, the odds we're going to read that whole thing very low. But if you're like, oh my gosh, I want to talk about this specific line, this specific moment, this specific piece of direction, that is the stuff that's almost a guarantee to be read. So I hope you're ready for that. And we'll have that post looking for your comments and questions and thoughts on the 1982 film up on Monday on Patreon. So leave a comment there and let us know if you have any questions about how this whole thing works. All right, Leo, any final thoughts?
I liked the line, he sees us as nothing more than a field of cabbages.
That was really good.
Yeah, for this big carrot man hulking around, batting at him. That was an interesting way to describe his motivations. That's the note I have here that we didn't get to. So
that's smart. Yeah, I do like too that the monster was attracted to the greenhouse, just trying to find like a little touch of home, little bit of his home environment, just to go frolic in the green a little bit. Also, that Scotty guy, that reporter, the only time that he really pushes too far is he's like, strawberries at the North Pole. Oh boy. And they're like this life into the situation. It's like, yeah, Scotty, you don't work here. Like, yeah, they're going to grow stuff in the North Pole. Just shut up every once in a while.
Did you notice in the background during the shot where the scientists they go into the greenhouse and they're checking the locks and making sure the door's shut? He goes and grabs a strawberry, is eating it.
Oh, that's funny. No, I missed that.
That's good.
That's good. All right.
He eats it and does like that's actually not bad kind of face.
North Pole strawberries, the place to be. Cool. Again, thank you so much, everybody. We'll see you next week with the deepest dive on John Carpenter's The Thing. And as always, JV was the thing the whole time. Bye, everybody.
I knew it.
Do you want to get your name or Twitch or YouTube channel in the description of everything we release? Record a podcast with us, put a picture of your choice on MinnMax's TV, or a whole lot more? You can check out the benefits for supporting us on Patreon. If you support MinnMax at any tier on Patreon, you can submit questions or comments for us to read on the air, and you'll also get access to the wonderful MinnMax Discord. We need your help to keep this whole indie trainer rolling, so we'd appreciate it if you checked us out.